Okay, let's get started. Here's a graphic we've seen before. Okay, so we won't spend a lot of time on this graphic today, but I am moving the vertical bar on each one of these now. And we're about in 2021, obviously, and we're still very much about in that flat part of the hockey stick. When people start to ask us who are your competitors and who are you competing against, and at the end of the day, we're just competing against time. We just really need to be there by the time that hockey stick starts to turn up, and I think we're very well positioned to be in that place. Okay, so the call today, put a theme together for the call, building at scale for the enterprise. We've been asked a number of times, and I'm going to go through exactly what, why, and how. It's taking what it's taking in order to get this thing accomplished. To be frank, we could have shipped something in October of last year. We could have put up a simple web page, started charging people $5 a month or whatever to back up single workstations, and it worked. I mean, we demoed Commvault doing it. So, at the end of the day, uh, we were there with that level. But the problem is that level isn't what's going to satisfy our projected customer that we're trying to reach. In the enterprise, we're going to be looking at multiple seats accessing the storage. We're going to be looking at, hundreds of terabytes, even up to petabytes of data. And quite frankly, none of the systems that are out there in the decentralized world today are capable of dealing with this. Oh yeah, there are a couple, like Filecoin that have large networks in place, but at this point, they've yet to be put under that serious stress test that enterprise scaling is going to require. So I'm going to show a little bit today about what we're doing in the testing phase and how we're sort of approaching that and how we think we're going to get there. And most of all, and I think the most important part to you guys is when. So to get started on our development efforts, in the quarter one, we had 134 commits to the Relayer stack. We added some telemetry to the stack now so that we can start pulling some performance metrics directly out of it. We added something called the auto contractor, which is forming prior to essentially the beginning of the year, all contracts were being formed manually. We were randomly picking and choosing or picking and choosing special sets. But now we have this auto contractor built. If you go back and read the white paper, the auto contractor will actually be the first step in fulfilling the vision of our dynamic contract sets, where we're actually picking and choosing based on performance metrics, geolocation, all of the various things that we've already put together that we'll be offering back to clients. Obviously, we've done an awful lot of bug fixing over the last couple of months. We did something which we're calling contract state overhaul, and what this is um, this was that change that I had noted in the last call, where we talked about would we be doing something like a master contracting set, and the answer is yes. And what that means is, so in a lot of the other decentralized networks that are out there, what ends up happening is you have a many to many situation where there are hundreds or thousands of contracts being formed with hundreds or thousands of storage providers, and is what it is. In our case, we would have done that. We would have had all of these instances of the relayer out in the field, and we would have had hundreds or thousands of contract sets being formed at each relayer, and then talking to the hundreds or thousands of storage providers on our network. Instead, what's happening now is we have a master contracting set. SCP Corp will form a contract with every single storage provider on the network, and then ultimately what we'll do is we'll use our tokening process that we've talked about to actually, to delimit between the different customers, between the different relayers, and between the different seats inside of each individual customer. So that's all kind of happening inside the relayer, but this contract state overhaul was to move that outside of the relayer and to put it into a master contractor server. And that master contractor server is now standing and starting to do that process. This is going to be an ongoing development process, and so we'll talk about this in the next call as well. And performance tuning, we're going to show a little bit of that as we get through the call. When we talk about doing relay or beta testing, a lot of people are sort of probably wondering what that means. Do we have one server set up and do this? In this case, we actually have all of these rigs running relayers right now. So we're doing a lot of testing. We're doing testing with some potential customers. We're doing testing internally. We're doing testing with actually some other stakeholders who are providing some stuff. I'll do a shout out to Jacob Schmidt at Cloud Factory, who's providing some server space and server resources for us. So that's part of that matrix that you're seeing there. The telemetrics guys, Rhinus, are busy putting together the incentives formulas for the new incentives. They worked really well last month, and going forward, they're starting to be automated. Pretty soon, we'll be locking the coins into specialized wallets so that they can be automatically distributed based on the formulas that we've set up. He's got the individual storage provider details dashboard looking really good. People are watching a metric called velocity right now to see how fast and what kinds of uploads they're getting to their instances. And he's also been working on the Examiner API development. If you don't know what the Examiner is, stay tuned because I'll get to it. But he's been working on actually pulling together some endpoints to do things like conversions for US dollars and for some of the other telemetrics that we're looking to provide. We added a new function in this quarter. We realized very quickly last year that we were running into a problem with the beta testing. So we've added a quality assurance person. Stefan is now in that role, essentially shepherding those 6 or 7 servers that we just looked at. He's tasked across the entire product strata, and I have a couple of really good projects that are going to be coming up for him, but for now he's mainly focused on this relay or beta testing. One of the areas we know we're going to have to do a lot of is we're going to have to do a lot of qualifications of platter based hard drives and even probably getting into some SSD work as well. So he's got a lot of really interesting work ahead of him. Okay, here we are on the Examiner. So this is the first actual unit. We've had done some supply chaining, so the very first units that ship will look exactly like this. And in the development process to get here, we had to do a number of things. First of all, we had to build a service on our back end that we're calling Super Admin, which is actually driving sort of the provisioning of these units. We have something called Supervisor that's running on every one of these units, and then there's a front end layer on top of them that we're calling Storage Manager, which we'll take a look at here in a second. So all of these services needed to be developed. And last quarter I got some ribbing, or I think we actually, you could probably take it a little bit further than that, that we had some sport made of us for bringing on board some contractors from the country of Ukraine. And these are the 2 individuals that we onboarded from that area, and we've been extremely happy with the work that they've done. And the work's been really good. And I think everybody's going to really like this device when it ships, because I'm going to show you some stuff, and then I'm going to tell you and extrapolate why it's going to be valuable to just the normal host. But if you buy one of these units, it's those contractors which will have assisted in getting it out into your hands. This is the storage manager. This is the basic screen that most people will spend their days looking at. We wanted it to be very simple. We wanted it to be very much clean. There's not a lot of tweaking and tuning that goes on with these devices. The expectation is you're going to plug it in, you're going to add like an email address, you're going to essentially ensure that your ports are forward, and then you're going to put it in a closet and forget about it. And maybe, log into it via your phone or whatever every now and then just to check the coins that you have, send some off to another wallet or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's just a very, very simple presentation. Tells you what you've earned, shows you what the hard drives are doing, tells you what some status is down at the bottom. But it's really built for your grandmother and anybody else around the planet that wants to become sort of an Uber driver for the SCP project and earn some passive income. We really want to move away from you have to be a techie to really get this stuff set up. And this is really sort of our solution to that. We know that people like a little bit more complex stuff from time to time, so there is an advanced screen if you want to see a little bit more detail about what's going on. Here you can actually see the breakdowns with the incentives that we're paying out. You get a call for some bandwidth presentation to see what you're serving up. You can see some contract status. There's some links for tech support and so forth. And then one of the things that you're seeing here that's actually pretty interesting is that there were only 4 drawers on that device, but you're seeing 16 storage drives here. And one of the things that we have tasked ourselves with is as soon as we get this 4 port unit out the door, we're going to be turning around and doing higher density rigs, probably 4U, 2U, that sort of thing, with up to 16 drives to provide that level of capacity for data center folks. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the whole process here in a minute, about how we expect to get a lot of these out into the field. Because at the end of the day, the real challenge on these isn't necessarily the units. The units themselves are not terribly expensive. I think, the hard costs in the 4 port or something around $500 when it's all said and done. The real cost is the $23 per terabyte to put the storage together, and that number's been pretty unyielding for the last, I don't know, about a year. Yeah, if you look hard, you find some volume purchases, you can get down a little bit lower, but $23 a terabyte is really a number we're really starting to use. Okay, so let's talk about what we're planning to do here. So the launch of this product is likely to happen over the next 3 or 4 weeks in May. The software is operational. Those were actual screen grabs from the software. The supervisor and super admin are essentially complete for V1. We have it running on a platform, so the next step is actually to do a whole bunch of quality testing on this specific device. And then as soon as we get past that, we'll load up a professional based website and people will be able to start pre-purchasing these. I'll talk a little bit here about the pricing, but I do want to say right up front that it's unfortunate, but we're going to end up in a back order situation almost immediately. I think what will end up happening is some 50 units will fly out the door and then we'll be in a back order situation. And it just has to do with COVID and how the world's ended up. There's just nothing we can really do about it. We've been sourcing components like crazy over the last month and a half. But at the end of the day, there's likely to be some component shortages that are going to lead to some challenges. So, for instance, we have a number of people who have said, "Well, look, I'm going to buy 10 of them," and well, that's we're going to have to limit it. Up at the front end, probably you're only going to be able to buy 1 or 2. So, if you're really interested in buying a unit, then you're going to need to sort of get in line if you want to have multiples. Now, here's the thing: they're going to end up costing about the same as a normal ASIC miner. So we're calling them a storage miner because in reality that's kind of what they're doing. And at the end of the day, the pricing does come down similar to an ASIC type device. But the thing about it is that that's pretty interesting is that from a standpoint of comparison to an ASIC, 4 drives are going to use about 25 kilowatts. The thing doesn't produce enough heat to even matter. And at the end of the day, it's quiet. It's not going to be loud at all. So these things can go anywhere, right? They can go in your residence, they can go anywhere and not really have that same environmental footprint. So from that standpoint, they're way different than an ASIC. The second thing is that the mean time between failure on these hard drives is going to be like 5 years. So at the end of the day, these systems are going to be able to stand up and act as nodes on the network for a long time to come and continue to generate income, whereas a typical ASIC is going to last you a year to a year and a half, and then you're going to have to start figuring out where it goes and what it does. So from that standpoint, these things are going to ROI and then they're going to generate income for a long time. So comparing the price isn't really necessarily fair because these are going to earn back a lot more money when it's all said and done. That said, we also understand where we are in things, so we're going to be doing some stuff. And this is the part that you can't take me completely at what's on the slide, but it's probably going to be close. What we're going to do, and people have talked about the big cold wallets that we have of SCP coins, but what we're planning to do here is we're planning to provide rebates on these units. So let's say you bought the 40 terabyte unit for 1995, and then ultimately you were able to stand the unit up for the next 12 months. What we'll end up doing is we'll be paying you back rebates on a quarterly basis. This is in addition to the average storage rent and the incentives that you're already making on the unit. So you'll still get all of that to work towards an ROI. But at the same time, if you make a certain amount of uptime and you're online for those 3 months, at the end of quarter one, you'll get a bulk payment from us automatically that will just go right into the wallet on this unit. And then if you stand up for 6 months, you'll get a second one, 9 months, a third one, and 12 months, you'll get the final one. And the rebates will end up being up to 50% of the purchase in US dollars, which will ultimately make these units ROI essentially in that first year. And that's really a big deal, I think. In the end, what's going to end up happening is when people understand what's going on here, this will become the primary storage node on our network. I don't see how it can't. You can't afford to buy drives at half price, so why wouldn't you do this? Okay, let's move on and talk a little bit about the host network. I'm certainly happy at the end of this to take questions about the Examiner, but we want to get to the demos of the relayers, so I want to kind of bust through the rest of this. So the host network's looking really good. Up and to the right is the way we're kind of describing it these days. That pink line is just really the thing in my life right now. It's everything I look at the first thing when I get up in the morning. The number of active hosts has kind of been stable. It's been going up and going down. There's been a bit of churn over the last couple of weeks. I think what's happening is that people are making decisions to do one thing or the other. We're seeing a lot of new people come in, and I think we're seeing a lot of people that had been here for a while starting to look to do something else. I'm not sure exactly why, but we are seeing some of that churn. So that's what makes up those 13 offlines. Now, those 13 offlines also include some people that have had some hard drive failures and things along those lines. What you're going to see is that when we get that Examiner shipping, these numbers are going to just go crazy, right? Because essentially we will immediately, 50% increase likely to the number of providers, and the number of total capacity is going to go up dramatically quickly. All of the data that you're seeing in the used data is testing data right now. Yeah, I mean, there's some community rent going on right now, but at the end of the day, 95% of that is testing data. Over the quarter, we paid out about 44,000 SCP coins in incentives, so we're really still way overpaying to build out the network. That's not going to stop through all of 2021. We're going to continue to way overpay. In this valuation, just pulling a rough number of 299 sats, I think is what I used. We ended up on the incentives paying up almost $13 a terabyte for the actual used storage that's out there. That's in addition to the actual storage rent that you achieve. So 14 to 15 bucks a terabyte is way beyond what these are going to ultimately earn. But for now, in the build out phase, the way we view that is Amazon goes out and sinks a big data center somewhere, they're going to spend $600 million. They got to pay for construction, they got to pay for zoning, they're going to pay for all the stuff that happens when they go out and drop a data center. This is how we do it, right? We're paying on the front end. In the case of build out in the form of these incentives rebates. By the time we get to 2022 and 2023 and they start to taper off, we'll have a full-blown network in place, and it'll just be a good solid passive income stream. Okay, and I'm going to start doing this in every one of these calls going forward. I'm going to profile one of our providers. Alessandro's been just a joy and a pleasure to interact with on our forum. He showed up and he said, look, I'm really going to do this, and he started setting up a bunch of rigs, and I asked him to put together a couple of simple little graphs, and the enthusiasm expressed in this paragraph is what we really want to see out of folks. But what ends up happening a lot of times is when they sort of really dive into the technical side, it gets challenging. So we can cover both now. We can cover the people that really want to be technical, and want to get into the hobbyist side and really kind of go crazy on the hardware software. And then we can also cover the people that just want to, put together an Airbnb and set it off to the side and not pay any attention to it. So with Daniel Recker, let me just get to another real quick paragraph that you can read, which is, I think, a very great sentiment, talking about how COVID has impacted us all, and how our strategy, our cloud, our tech, and our product offerings that we're looking to do really fit in well right now with the global situation. I think COVID, it's unfortunate to say this, but I think COVID actually is going to be a very big driver for us. So let's take a look at his stuff. So he sent a couple of photos of his facility, and he's actually gone to the distance of doing some things, buying some big rack cases and so forth. He started to acquire some Supermicro server boxes. For now, he's got a few removables. He's got up on top of the rack, or on top of the shelves there. He's got some external USB drives. He's got UPSs running the whole thing. He's actually got some ASIC miners running in there as well. So he's kind of got the whole thing going on here. But what he's really building is he's building a data center inside his residence. And that is really a game changer, right? I mean, that's what's going to change this whole thing. When we talk about our product being a distributed data center, what we're talking about is radical to the edge, right? We're talking about pushing the edge out farther than anybody else is. Wasabi goes out and contracts with all these high profile data centers. They're small and mid tier data centers, but they're nowhere near the edge. Not in the way we define the edge. The edge in our case is going to be the house next door to yours. So we think that this is really going to be a facility you're going to see a lot of over the coming years. Here's some other photos that he's put together of some of the networking and inside and the back of the rack and so forth. So if you want to be profiled in here, let me know, and next call we'll pick and choose who's the next host that gets profiled. Okay, moving on to blockchain mining. Essentially, we're starting to see some interesting stuff. We started out with 300 coins per block that were being mined. We're now down to roughly about 50% of that, so that's pretty interesting. It's just continuing to move on and on and on. We're about 2.5 years into it. And you can see that every day about 2,400 coins are being burned to keep the inflation in check. Hash rate has been pretty consistent over the last 9 to 12 months at around 3 petahash. And then we really now started to realize something about our project that we needed to remediate. And that's that the potential for a 51% attack is just sky high for us. It's not sky high because there's a lot of money at stake. It's sky high because of how we came to be. And I'm not going to go into the whole, attack situation, all that. Everybody who knows about us and knows the story knows what's going on there. But what I will say is that the way it all played out was really curious and very interesting. And to this day, I continue to go back and reread and understand what happened. But one of the things that we saw very quickly is that when the fork happened that we sort of sprung from the Genesis block that we started, there were about 60 petahash of free hash rate out there that you would have expected would have floated over to projects like ours. And we've never gone be above, say, like 4 or 5. I think 5 was the highest we ever got. And there was another project that did pick up the legacy chain. I think that was a sham. I think it was actually an orchestrated thing to keep us from taking the legacy. And the deal is that they got about 10 petahash, but there's been about 30 or 40 that's just never come online. It just got put into shelves or whatever and never came online. So that's still sitting out there, and it's definitely sitting out there for a reason. And those folks probably have a trivial ability to attack us and to essentially cause big disruptions. Today, frankly, wouldn't matter. If they did it today, yeah, it'd be a nuisance. We'd end up, we already have long confirm rates with the exchanges. We'd say, look, stop. There's not a lot of money on the exchanges right now, so it's not like they'd earn an awful lot. we'd have to roll back to a checkpoint on the chain, and we'd start over, and it would be something that we might get a little reputational harm, but ultimately it wouldn't be a big deal. What would be a big deal is if we launched an enterprise grade product and then had this happen to us. We'll talk a little bit about this further here in a couple of slides. So finishing up on the consensus stuff, right now, one of the things we're seeing is that the coin scarcity is continuing to grow as expected. The declines are very linear on our mining emission. What happens is 0.001 SCP are dropped on every single block. And so what that did is, even though we're about 50% in terms of the block reward that's being sent out there, about 75% of the entire emission is complete, right? Because of the way it's very heavily loaded at the front end. We also have China rainy season coming right now over the next 4 to 6 months. And so we're probably likely to see hash rate increase in competing for a scarce sort of asset going forward. The next 6 to 9 months are really the end of the lucrative amounts of coins that can be mined because of this. And what ends up happening is we're currently now 2.5 years in, and you can see that about 41 million coins out of what will ultimately end up being around 55 million in 2023 have already been mined, right? So 75% of the circulation is done. So you can't really stand up a set of mining rigs right now and expect to build those kind of bags that people built back in 2019 and 2020 when it was very easy. Okay, so to solve the mining attack issue that is on the table, we've decided to go with a fairly generic proof of stake in many ways. As with everything else in our project, we're really looking at tried and true. We're looking at things that are going to be rock solid and things that are going to solve problems for us. We're really not the science fair guys. If you want the science fair guys, you're going to have to go look at some other project. We're the guys that are trying to build stuff that actually works in crypto today. So the proof of stake that we're working off of is the model that's been built on the Waves project, which is actually pretty interesting because our lead developer is actually the guy that did the last Waves proof of stake consensus change. So it's not like we're starting into this without any experience. Our lead dev actually understands this from top to bottom. And so he's going to be leading that effort to switch over from proof of work to proof of stake. It's going to take probably 4 to 6 months, depending on what we end up with in terms of onboarding additional senior backend developers. But he is going to be transitioning over and working directly on that. A couple of key features. There's a nice blog that we posted on this the other day, but we're working on a white paper. He and our chief architect are working on the white paper on this. We should have that in a couple of weeks. But the key features that I think are going to be really interesting are this verifiable random function. One of the things that happened on Waves for a long time is that they realized that people with lots of coins were getting more than their fair share. With this VRF function that's built into it, essentially what happens is we're using block headers to provide a little bit more pseudo randomness, and ultimately what we end up with is a much more fairer capability. Now, we couple that with the leasing capability. And what's the leasing capability? Well, let's say you have 100 of these staking tokens and, there's 1,000 of them in the circulation. So what you're sort of hoping to get is about 10% of the mining emission. But what happens is you have to lock those coins into a unit. You have to make them available on the network. And essentially, you put yourself at risk because somebody could hack in and take your coins or whatever, and you wind up in a challenging situation. What leasing allows you to do is to sort of send or delegate your coins to to these pools, and they're like mining pools. And essentially, then you don't have to expose your coins. You're just essentially delegating them. You still get the same rewards, but now you continue to have security on your tokens. So that and the VRF are the two real big key things that I think are going to drive this as being very positive. The rest of it works like typical staking. Essentially, what happens is you put up a certain number of stake tokens, and then you get a percent, some kind of a number of the block emission on each block. We're trying to stay very consistent with what we already have. So instead of having 1 minute blocks or 30-second blocks or things like that, we're going to be having 10-minute blocks, same as we already have. There's really no issue there. We're not cramming transactions at this point. Things are not getting super bloated or anything. So we're going to maintain that same emission schedule all the way through to 2023. And ultimately, this will just be a good change to sort of take away an attack vector. Right now, we're in the middle of another fundraising round, partly because of the proof of stake effort, partly because of the relayer, where we are with the relayers and so forth. So, what we're trying to do is to add and buttress a little bit more to our treasury so that we can onboard some additional core developers. We have a process now in place where we've done some contract work. We're not going to go get more contractors right now. We're looking to actually hire people that'll be long termers. We're actually looking through CVs right now. We want to bring on two back-end senior Golang folks with high scalability capabilities to really kind of pick up and keep driving that relayer development as well as the additional stuff that goes on top. And then all of that is in service to getting to a token crowd sale. So the staking token that's going to be used in the proof of stake is these SC Prime funds. And right now, the SC Prime funds, and I'll show it on a future slide here what the breakdown is, but most of them are owned by the corporation. A significant percentage are owned now by our existing angel stakeholders who all got them for free as a no cost, no value freebie when they bought stock shares in our corporation. At the end of the day, that point in time, we had no idea we were going to do this with proof of stake, so it was kind of a happy accident for them. Believe me, they're all very happy about it. But at the end of the day, what will end up happening is those SPFs will be used to mine the blockchain for us going forward. Now, the reason why we take away an attack vector is because we're putting the mining into the hands of friendly people, right? We can't, force them to stake their coins and mine coins. If they don't want to, they don't have to. But if they want to, we know that they're going to be friendly to the project and they're not going to be likely to attack the project through some kind of, crazy, majority hash rate type situation. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this public crowd sale. We found a process that's going to work really well for us with this thing called Regulation Crowd Fund. It's an SEC exemption. And so what's going to happen there is we're going to be able to put up a number of these SPF tokens for sale to the general public. You'll be able to buy one or 100 or 1,000 or whatever. And you won't need to be an accredited investor. You won't need to really be anything. You'll just need to have a couple $100 and you'll be able to buy a bunch of coins. So then you'll be able to turn around and use those to stake to take advantage of the block emission. At the same time, remember, these things still pull 10% out of all network transactions. So going forward, we expect that they're going to do really well. I'm not making a valuation judgment. I'm just saying that I think that these tokens could be useful and, we're going to make them available to you. So approximately 35% of the circulating supply will end up going into the regulation crowd fund. We'll also need to use some of this additional raise we're doing right now for marketing and sales. This is not an advertisement for a capital raise, but if you are an accredited investor and able to participate in this kind of thing, we are actually right now selling some shares of stock in the corporation, and you should DM me or contact me via email or get in touch with me, mention in the comments or something along those lines. The initiatives that we have coming up are the Examiner launch this month. We've got a product launch that we've now moved to the summer timeframe. Essentially, with everything that we've been doing on these relayers to push them out to scale, we've run into a number of challenges that have exposed the what happens when you really start throwing real workflows at the stack. And so ultimately, we've kind of been forced to push it off. We still have a number of things on top of the relayer to do. We have an IAM module. That's not going to take all that long because we actually already have it, but we just need to tweak and tune it and put it in place for our thing. We have this deferred contracts coding effort we've got to get through. This is the second half of our tokening strategy. This is really important. This is what we're really focused on as far as immediately after the relayer is sort of finalized in place. And then we have a couple of other things like billing and a front end website and all of that kind of stuff. So summer time frame looks ripe. It'll be right about the same time that we'll end up being able to say put a firm date on when the consensus changeover happens. It will also be right around the same time we do the token crowd sales. So it'll be a really good summer for us, I think, in a lot of different ways. Okay, I'm just going to rush through these because I want to get right to the demos. So essentially, this is that screen I show every time, which is the big cold wallets that we ended up with. They've dropped now on a percentage of the circulating supply to about 16%. All of the coins that are in these cold wallets are earmarked towards network buildouts. So when I talked about rebates for these examiners, this is it right here. This is where those coins are going to go. They're not going to go into our pockets and then be dumped on people. It's not like we've gone out to the blockchain and grabbed a bunch of coins and are now like strategically selling them. That's not what's going to happen here. These coins are all going to the network providers, the network build out. That's what all of this is going towards. And right now we think that those wallets can cover somewhere around 300 to 500 petabytes of storage build out. But if our coin was to run up in value between now and say, next year, it's quite likely we could actually double or triple those numbers. So we're very pleased about ending up in this situation because those coins are definitely going to be a very positive way to get this network built. We have some time lock software that we wrote over the last 2 quarters, and the time locks actually are going to get set up and made public. And what we'll do is we'll time lock release the coins in these wallets directly out into the Examiner rebate process. Okay, and then this is the SPF distribution that we envision right now. About 43% are owned by the corp, 24% are held by the angels. We're going to throw 30 into this crowd sale. The community's already got about 2.5%, and then there were a very low number that went off to airdrops, but that's the number that exists. 200 million is the supply. It's all the supply that's ever going to be. For us to change the supply now, there's plenty of people out there that would have to sort of vote on it, and it would not probably be a very easy vote for us to go out there and change the emissions. So anybody asking that question, geez, you changed the emissions several times on this. Well, no, we changed it a couple of times as we were getting our feet wet and trying to figure out what was the right strategy, and then we set the final emission, and that's what it's been and that's what it's going to be. Okay, as promised, we're going to do a demo here of the Relayer product. We've got a familiar guest for the call from our last call, Charles Hausman, a stakeholder and former data center founder, had a successful exit, I think, as we talked last time. He's back with us to demo pro-level workflows directly into the Relayer product. Charles is helping us beta test and throw some real live workflows through the VM software. VM has been really good for us to test because it actually throws the most in S3 compatibility at our Relayer product. We found a lot of bugs. We've smoothed a lot of things out performance-wise. And so, Charles, how are you doing today?
Doing good, Ken. How are you?
Oh, it's been a good call, and I'm doing fine. Let's take a look at VM.
All right. So what we're going to do is the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually connect to the product and be able to create a backup set for both sides. All right. So I'm going to go into backup repositories. I'm going to add a repository. We're going to do object storage. We're going to do S3 compatible. We're going to name it SCP demo call. Okay, we're going to limit the tasks to 64, which is what we've been testing lately. So that's 64 concurrent tasks that can be talking to the bucket at the same time. Okay, we're going to enter our service point, which is on the network, and in this case, it's a relayer address. Get that in there correctly. Prime 9000 RELAY. Okay, perfect. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to do my preconceived credentials to make this quick. The gateway is going to be this backup server it's going to pass through to get to the internet. All right, so I've entered the service point, which is on the relayer itself. I've given it a name, which is hypothetical. I've put in my credentials, and I'm going to have the gateway for this run through the actual Veeam server itself to get out to the internet. So the next point, we hit next. Then we get to the bucket selection. And in this case, we're going to use Veeam test, and that's our bucket. We're then going to go create a folder, which is a direct connectivity to the bucket up on the network, which is cool. We're going to call this Veeam backup. And enter. That's going to go back. Okay, reset, rewind. Let us know it's good. We're not going to have any limits here. We're going to leave that as it is. And we're going to hit apply. System's going to make sure that that's okay. It's going to add it to the Veeam list of backup repositories that we can utilize. And then everything's successful. So we now have a successful connection out to the network called SC Prime Demo Call. We have our local performance layer called SC Demo Share. And now what we need to do is bind the two together in what they call a scale out backup repository. What that does is that rolls the backup to the performance tier, which is local disk in this case, and then it automatically will stream it based on parameters that I set here out to the network, which would be the S3 compatible share that we created in the last step. Okay, we'll look at advanced here. We're going to use use per machine backup files. I always set that because that makes it easier for me to do restores than plow through all those files. Data locally is fine as an option. I'm going to extend the backup out. I'm going to create and I'm going to select the one we just created in the last screen. Okay. I always set this to 30. And then I also encrypt my backups. So I'm going to use my usual password I use for encryption to make sure that although everything on the network is encrypted, I'm just going to encrypt it again.
Yeah,
The
this
system
double
can handle that.
encryption is actually one of the cool features that we're able to bring to the table.
Yeah, it's very good because everyone's going to take the encryption's great out on the world and great on the internet, but the fact that I can wrap my own key around what I'm sending you, it just makes me sleep better at night.
Yep.
Okay, so now we've created a backup scaled out repository, and now what we're going to do is actually go create a backup set to utilize that repository. So we're going to do here just a virtual machine backup. Oops, sorry. We're going to use a virtual machine backup from Hyper-V, which I have here. We're going to give it a name. We call it SCP demo call. We're going to go add a place to go find it, which is one of my demos here. And then we're going to go grab a backup. Tells it's about 27 gig in size. We're going to hit next. Now we're going to come select which repository we want to use. And in this case, we're going to select the one we just created, SCP demo backup demo call. Okay. We're then going to go into advanced options. We're going to go under storage, and we're going to change this to WAN optimized. All right. That keeps everything in check with the internet access that I have so that I don't overload anything on my end. And then we're going to hit next. We're okay with these settings. We're not going to run it automatically, although I have done that before. We're going to run the job when we kick it off. And now the system's going to drop right into running the actual backup. Now with Veeam, when you run a scale out backup repository, it's going to connect to the VM and it's going to stream the state of the backup. And in this case, because we just created it, a full backup to the performance tier, which is the local disk array that I have on that network in that data center. And then once that is complete, which won't be too long because even though it's 175 gig drive, as it says here, it's really only 27 gig of usage compressed. So the system will tear through that locally pretty fast. I usually see backup rates in the 400 plus megabytes per second. So this is going to move pretty quick once it gets going. It won't be too long. So Ken, what I really like about having the network there is being able to have, my local backups at, full speed, hundreds of megabytes a second, but also have that safeguard with the SCP network, so that if something happens to my disk locally, because am I in every data center all the time? No. Do I follow every alert every single time I get one? Kinda. So like having that extra blanket for an extremely low cost rate is just again an extra layer of security that I really like, because I can automate it here, and it's not like I have to create different backups to make sure that I have that protection with SCP. It can just roll right off and automate and make my life super easy by making the steps I just showed you will have every single backup be in both places. It's really slick. And again, granted, it's a WAN backup versus a LAN backup, so it's going to be a little slower, which is totally fine. And as you can see here, we're chugging through 3.5 gig, and sending up 2 gig. The system is doing the exact same thing and just shoveling out the line. So on the back end, you should start to see data coming right in now. And now we're getting more than half of that, and we're not, we're in beta testing here. So really good sign for the technology, really good sign for the relayer. I mean, the fact that we're knocking on 40 megabytes a second is huge. I'll say we look like we're processing about 37 megabytes a second reading, and then over here it was up to 50. Now it's down to 30. So we're seeing some really good, consistent throughput here. Yeah, so this backup's about almost halfway done now, which is great to see in 3 minutes. And as far as my host going, I'm about 14% CPU, half the memory's going, and you can see the output Ethernet wise, 200 megabits per second up and down the pipe, receiving and transmitting. So it's working pretty well. It's pulling in from the network, because that's a VM on the network, and it's sending right up consistently. It found 2 objects, so 2 sets of this it needs to send up. But right now, if we were just doing the one version, it would have been done in 8 minutes, because we're at about that 27 gig size. And now there's some other pieces from the first time. I must have run it before, and it found it in the repository on the performance tier. So it's picking that up too and bringing that up too. So we're going to go north of the 27 gig size, because it found, which is actually really cool. Veeam looked at it and said, hey, you said send everything. I found more than what you were running, so I'm going to go grab that too.
Okay, let's follow the data through over to the relayer side, where we have a slew of Grafana panels set up that really help us to see everything that's going on the back end. At the very top, we've got the relayer cache and contracts settings. The contracts just give us information to tell we're ready to go. The cache is really where all of the action's going to happen. And we'll take a look right now. The top big brown area is the amount of data that's going to be uploaded. The bottom area is the amount that's already been processed and started to be uploaded to the network. Here we're looking at the disk I/O bytes. This is the information that's already being sent out to the providers. And we can see the cache area now, the used is increasing. Essentially what's happening is we're doing erasure coding, we're doing encryption, we're doing the sharding, we're throwing it into there, and then it's being prepared to be sent out to the network. And now we're looking at the individual providers that we have set up. We've chosen 3 out of the network. We'll take a look at 1 just to see what's going on. And you can see the segments now that are being actually uploaded directly onto that provider. And one of the benefits of our strategy and our technology that we've set up here with the relayer, with the caching, is that we don't have any network padding. There's no trying to shove 5K into a 4 meg sector. If it's a 4 meg sector, it's filled to the brim with data, because all that happens back on the relayer, where we wait till we have enough data to fill 4 megs worth of storage and then upload it. And this is really important, because the customer's only paying for what they're using. They're not paying for padding or for any extra storage that's not actually being used. Okay, and we're going to scroll down and look at some database related stuff. Postgres and PG Bouncer, which is our connection pooler. We're looking at the queries per second here, and so we're really starting to bang on the database pretty good. What the database actually is all the key pair metadata. In the metadata architecture, instead of having all these individual files live on individual customer desktops, what's happening is all the key pair metadata is being stored into that Postgres database. But going forward, the database is going to be doing even more duty in service to all the additional metadata that goes along with object storage. Talking about ACLs, tags, life cycling, all the various things that you definitely need to have full S3 sort of compatibility. And here we break down the whole entire Docker container, which is the actual full relayer instance. We see we've got the database, we've got the host gateway, we've got host IO, we've got the S3 gateway, and we also have our contract server. And so each one of these displays individual statistics depending on what we're looking at: disk, CPU, memory, etc., network, and ultimately we can get a good sense of where the system is being stressed at any given point. At this point right now, we're not seeing any part of the system really getting overly stressed. Okay, and now let's take a look down here at the bottom. One of the things that we spend a lot of time looking at is the disk IO, because that's really on the relayer bin where we've been getting bogged down, and it's looking pretty good at this point. And that's a quick run through of the entire relayer that we currently have set up and configured. Now, there is still some frosting layers that we have to develop on top: billing. We've got an IAM module ready to go. We have a few other things that we have to do that are customer facing related. But otherwise, the relayer itself is in pretty good shape, and ultimately we're about ready to wrap it up and to begin offering the whole thing as a product. Right now we're targeting the summer time frame for the ultimate launch. Thanks a lot, everybody, for showing up today. We really appreciate your participation, and have a good day.